So, welcome to Örgryte, to the North German Baroque organ, and our encounter now with the organ music by Heinrich Scheidemann. He studied for Svelink as an apprentice, like the Hamburg organists did, and many young organists from all over Europe. They came to Amsterdam for a period of 3 years, and they had a scholarship from their congregation. They lived with the master and learned as an apprentice all the aspects of keyboard and organ music making, composition, improvisation, as we say today, and the techniques, the compositional techniques of the time. And when he came back to Hamburg, he had the Hanseatic North German organs like here. So he took the three-manual concept of the Dutch organ tradition in his apprentice time, of course, to his heart, and then translated and further developed this with the four-manual and pedal concept of Northern Germany. So a preludium, like the three works, the toccata and fantasy of Svelling's time, were then developed in the context of Hamburg with multi-choral performances. So we have a wonderful preludium in G by Scheidemann, where we see, based on harmony and opening, where we could play, and it's very natural to play with a North German type of piano in the Hauptwerk, with a pedal reed registration, also with piano, and then since we know that the piece will develop with a lot of sequential patterns and kind of dialogue things in a similar way, with different textures like in Svelling, but now in a way which is more in the Hamburg tradition. We prepare the other divisions, so maybe just for a smaller piano like 8/4-2 in the Richtpositiv, 8/4-2 in the Oberwerk, and also in the Brustwerk. And we could hear modulations going to the dominant and then bringing us back, and an expressive kind of linear, wonderful texture, basically of a transitus movement, stepwise movement in the manual. So here comes a different motive, and I go to the Richtpositiv first. So going between these divisions and exploring the motive is a natural possibility. After this exposition, Scheidemann moves to sequential patterns, and there we could involve the Brustwerk as well. lot of possibilities to bring out the composition with the different sounds and divisions of the organ. And towards the end, of course, he closes with plano texture based on harmony. Another type of genre, very important in the liturgical life, was to play the motet of the Sunday when the schola with the cantor was not at the church. It was only once a month that the choir came, the musicians. But in between, the organist might have one of his friends from the Staatsmusikanten there to play, to do something in the organ, or to one of the singers to sing in the organ. So it could be a combination of such. Maybe also in this motet intabulations, one part sung and the organ playing the rest. And as a keyboardist, of course, you did some of the ornaments, the diminutions that you learned by Master Svelink and further developed, reflecting vocal practice. And the stop that generally was used is just the principle. So, Benedicam Dominum in omni tempore, a motet where Scheidemann did an intabulation, is just a simple vocal piece that starts and in the intabulation version by Scheidemann. Lovely, beautiful, artful, ornamental kind of versions of the motets. And Scheidemann was the master of this period. In the 1620s, 30s, we have quite many of his fantastic model examples of the intabulation practice. Then, of course, ecophantasia manner of playing solo with the hymns that were sung in liturgy and the function of the organ to in dialogue with the choir, with the schola, maybe with the congregation, increasingly in the 17th century, to do alternative. And Magnificat was one very important Saturday Vespers liturgical song. And we have a complete set of Scheidemann Magnificat settings, all tones, and I've just picked the 8th tone here, where we have 4 variations or verses. And we know that the organ played 4 times in Hamburg in the Magnificat. So he starts with the cantus firmus in the tenor, which we could play with the trumpet, 8 and maybe octave 4, and then, like we did in Svelink, just principles 8-4 for the manual parts. And this could, of course, be done also on 16-foot pitch with a much fuller registration. Hauptwerk and pedal. So generally it's a good idea to explore first the same pitches in manual and pedal. And if there's voice crossing or something, you have to pay attention. Now, the second variation could be played with the sync solo of the Oberwerk and the 8-foot principal sound in the accompaniment, maybe also in the pedal, same pitch, 8-foot pitch. But here, since we know that Scheidemann's style was that of Lieblichkeit, he had a nimble hand and a gentle manner, and this is reflected in his way of doing these settings. Not so much counterpoint, a minimum of figuration in the accompaniment. So let's just try with the Gedacht and the Querflute, the Traverso, and then the accompaniment on whole flute and Spitzflute of the Oberwerk, and in the pedal the octave 8, the string, and see what he does. And there's a lovely place, I'll just try to play that for you with Scheidemannish kind of figuration. The third variation is like a Liturgical, more polyphonic. So we go to our principles, maybe just 8-foot or principle 8 and 4, which gives more clarity in the bass. And in the pedal we take the same. So here is the difference. The pedal is obbligato, always involved to play. So for imitation, and he develops to a point where suddenly we hear cantus firmus in the bass, in whole notes. And that's maybe a place where I could change the registration to the trumpet 8 in the pedal. And we know the apprentices were always at the master's side and could help to do registration. It was part of the learning process. Slow cantus firmus notes brought out with the trumpet. The fourth variation, and this is quite typical for all the Hamburg composers doing Magnificat verses, goes into some kind of figuration, which could be played with big sounds, cosmic kind of association, but also smaller sounds. And here I will just introduce you to this technique with parallel thirds and 13th decimas and so with the 4-foot flute sounds. So we take the Spitzflute of the Oberwerk, the Blockflute of the rgpositiv, and the octave 4 for the cantus and the pedal. Very sweet and wonderful way to interleave in the Magnificat sung in the Saturday Vespers. Of course, Scheidemann also played longer, what we say, chorale fantasias, and we have in the cycle, the complete cycle of Magnificat versions, several auf zwei Klavier, as they're called here, fantasias. And in these you can hear many of the echo and dialogue ideas of Swelinkian type. If we explore a section where maybe the mightiness of certain people are expressed in music, we can take the reed registration, like the trumpet 16 of the great with the trumpet 8 of the Oberwerk, and to have the Dulcian 16 with the barb 5 in dialogue in the rgpositiv. And he continues in the next section with 2-part motives. We call it double echo. So let's take the barb 5 with the 4-foot flute and the trechte regal with a 4-foot flute in the Brustwerk. And we could also take, or maybe we take a different color, the Dulcian in the Brustwerk, and we take the Vox Humana with the flute 4 in the Oberwerk. So short length resonator reed dialogue in 3 manuals in this section. So Scheidemann has a lot of this dialogue and of colors of similar kinds that were typical for the Hamburg organ, where the pedal often plays the cantus firmus, and then in some sections the manuals just explore and develops. So he was one of the main organists and masters. Had the organist position in the Katharinen church, which was in the harbor of Hamburg with all the wealthy people around, and a fabulous instrument where he developed his organ preaching art in this style that was based on what he learned by Jan Petersen Sweelinck, but further developed with the tonal resources and the musical aesthetic of Hamburg. And there was a fabulous staircase up to the organ. So when Scheidemann came to the instrument, it was the distinguished organist that came up to enrich the lives and move the hearts of the wealthy congregation in the harbor quarters with his organ art. And he inspired many people who came to study with him and to study with his colleague, Jakob Pretorius, who was in the Petri Church. And Matthias Weckmann came to Hamburg to study with Pretorius, but also learned from Scheidemann. And we will soon continue our sessions with the organ art by Matthias Weckmann.